Hello creative filmmakers, thanks for watching Orange 83. In this video you're going to learn all the basics for Adobe Premiere Pro CC 2018. All the things that I cover in this tutorial mostly apply to older versions like CC 2017 and CS6. This tutorial is meant for beginners or anyone who would like to start using Adobe Premiere. And also, if you are a daily user of Premiere, you might learn something from this video. If you want, you can practice along with this tutorial. I've used clips from videvo.net. It's a great source for free stock footage. You can start downloading right away without the need to sign up. I will put the download links in the video description. If you apply the things that you learn in this tutorial, you should be able to make a short movie like this. Now it's time to start editing inside Premiere. I'm using a Windows 10 PC for this tutorial, but most of the things that I cover inside Premiere are similar on a macOS. And once you've got Premiere started, this is the first screen you will see. Let's start a new project by clicking this button. Let's change the name for this project into Tutorial. And below that you can also set the path for your project file. Make sure to select the directory with enough free disk space. We're going to leave all the other settings on default, because these are the more advanced settings for the project file, and in this tutorial we will only cover the basics. Now let's click OK to further open up Premiere. If you're using CC 2018, then this is the default layout at startup. Now in case your layout looks very different than mine, then you can change this inside the Window menu and then go to Workspace and select Editing to get the default layout. For now we're going to use the color layout. This is the one that I mostly use. The only difference with the editing layout is that this layout adds a couple of color correction and color grading panels. I'm going to tell you more about color grading later on in this tutorial. You can also quickly switch between the layouts with the buttons here on top of the screen. You can also fully customize the setup to your own preference. Let's take this effects panel for example. You can click here and then hold it with the left mouse button, and then you can drag it to any place you prefer. And if you like to, you can also place it between existing panels. But for now I'll put this one back to the default position. And by the way, you can also move it inside an existing panel. Okay, I think we covered the layout part enough for now. Let's move over to the project panel, and there we're going to import some footage. The project panel is the place where you'll find all the imported items for your project, like video, audio and stills. Now we're going to import some of the clips that I've downloaded from videvo.net. You can right click here in the project panel and then select Import. Inside Windows this will open up a browser window, and inside a Mac OS this will open up the Finder. You can then select all the necessary files for your project and then click Open. And as you can see, all the selected files are now imported inside the project panel. Currently we are watching the thumbnail view. With this button you can also switch to a detailed list view. This view will give you a lot of essential information about the clips that you've imported. For example, you can see frames per second and also the video resolution. I prefer to have the frame rate column next to the video resolution column. And luckily you can do this inside Premiere. So now we've got all the necessary information to create the first sequence. A sequence is an object inside your project where you can assemble your clips. A sequence can consist of multiple video and audio tracks on a timeline. A project can contain multiple sequences, and also an individual sequence can also include another sequence on its timeline. All this info might be confusing or even a bit overwhelming perhaps. Let's just create the first sequence, and I'm sure it will get a lot more clear when you see the timeline. You can manually create a new sequence by clicking the New button and then select Sequence. And in the next window you can manually select a preset for your sequence. You can, for example, select DSLR and then select the desired resolution and frame rate. This might be the way to go if you have a specific output format to request from a client, for example. But if you are not limited to a specific resolution or frame rate, then I would suggest to use the following option. If you look inside the project panel in the detailed list view, you can see that most of the footage is 25 frames a second with a resolution of 1920 by 1080. So it would be best to use a sequence with these settings. Although Premiere is pretty good in handling different frame rates, it's always best to stick to the frame rate of your footage. And that's exactly what we'll do with the following option. If you right-click one of the video files and then select New Sequence from Clip, Premiere will create a new sequence based on the settings of the video file. And Premiere will also import that clip to the timeline. Here you can see that Premiere has also created a sequence file in the project panel. You can recognize a sequence object by this little icon here. And when we take a look at the properties of this sequence, you'll see that it has the same settings as the file that we created it from, 25 frames a second and 1920 by 1080. You can also change the name of the sequence, simply left click on it and then type anything you like. Enough about sequences for now, let's move over to the timeline. The timeline is separated in two parts. The tracks in the top part are mainly for visual content like videos, stills and other video editing objects. And the bottom tracks are for audio content like music, sound effects and voiceovers. And as you can see, the clip that we've used to create this sequence does not contain any audio. You can scrub through the timeline by left-clicking the time indicator and then drag it to the left or the right. If you want to trim or shorten a clip on the timeline, you can move the mouse pointer to the edge of the clip and a red icon will appear. Left click and then move the mouse to the point where you want to cut the track. Of course, you can also do the same at the beginning of the clip. By holding the left mouse button, you can move an item on the timeline anywhere you prefer. So now we've got one clip on the timeline, let's add some more. You can do this by simply dragging the footage items from the project panel to the timeline. Let's take the clip with the little frog. Left click and then drag it over to the timeline. And again, if you scrub through the timeline, you can directly preview the results in the project monitor. Now let's say we want to shorten the first clip. You could do this in the same way that I showed you earlier in this tutorial, but that would leave a space between the first and the second clip. Then you also need to move the second clip to fill up the gap. Now Premiere has got a great solution for that and it's called Ripple Edit. If you do the same steps while holding the Ctrl key on your keyboard, you will see a yellow icon instead of a red one. And now when you shorten a clip, the other clips on the timeline will automatically connect. And of course you can do this at both sides of the clip. And as you can see, we've now shortened both clips without a gap between them. Another way to trim the footage that you would like to use in your project is to double click it in the project panel and it will open up in the source monitor. In there you can preview the clip and then set in and out points for the part you want to use. Let's say we only want to use this part of the clip, then we set an in point with this icon or you use the I key on your keyboard. And let's say we want to use it until this part of the clip, then we need to set an out point. And now that we've got the selection ready for this clip, you can simply drag it over to the timeline. Next we're going to take a look at another tool that is available for editing on the timeline. Right next to the timeline you've got a small panel with a couple of tools. So far we've only been using the selection tool, which can be activated with the V key. Another tool that you will use a lot if you start editing with Premiere is the razor tool. This tool can also be activated with the C key. The small knife blade icon is already an indication for what this tool can do. You can use this tool to cut any track in half. Simply hover over and left click to cut the clip in two parts. Let's zoom in on the timeline so you can see the results. You can zoom in on the timeline by holding the Alt key combined with the scroll wheel on your mouse. If I now again use the selection tool, we can separate the two parts of the clip. Let's attach the two separated parts and next we're going to look at transitions between the clips. For that we need to go to the Effects panel. Inside the Effects panel you'll find a couple of categories of effects that are available to apply to your footage. And one of them is the Video Transitions category. In this video we're going to look at the most common transitions that are available for free inside Premiere. You will find them inside the Dissolve section. The Cross Dissolve transition is the default transition inside Premiere. You can also switch to another default transition. Simply right click and then select Set Selected as Default Transition. Let's apply the dip to black to the first two clips. You can apply a transition by dragging them over to the timeline and place them right between two clips. And now this is how the transition looks. And we're going to apply the cross dissolve between the other two clips. And as you can see, Premiere applied the transition at the end of the clip and not between the two clips. This sometimes happens inside Premiere without a good reason, but there's a way to fix this. You need to go to the Effect Control panel, and then at the alignment options you need to select Center at Cut. And as you can see, the transition is perfectly centered, and this is how the transition looks. Now in case you would like to apply the same smooth zoom transitions that I did in the beginning of this video, you can watch the video that I've linked on top of the screen. So far we've only used clips without audio, so now we will import a clip that also includes some audio. You can also import files by dragging them directly from an Explorer window to Premiere Pro. And now when I drag this clip over to the timeline, you'll see two tracks appear, one for video and one for audio. Now when I give the timeline a playback by hitting the spacebar, you will also hear the audio preview for the project. And you can also stop the playback by hitting the spacebar. If you want to see a bit more of the waveform, you can increase the height of the track. Next I will also import a file that only contains audio. It's a free-to-use background music track from YouTube. If you want to know more about royalty-free music for online videos, then click the link above. And you can also simply drag this over to the project panel inside Premiere. And we will place this background music on the second track right below the other audio track. And let's also give this one a quick playback by hitting the spacebar. Next we're going to create some titles, and we will also give them a bit of animation. For now I will mute the background music track so we don't have that much noise when we do a quick preview. You can mute or unmute audio by clicking this M icon next to the track. Now let's say we want to add a title to the movie, somewhere here in the middle. We can do this by using the Type tool. You'll find it here in the menu next to the timeline. And you could also enable it by using the T key on your keyboard. Once enabled, you can create a text box inside the preview window by holding the left mouse button. And then you can start typing. In this case we'll type Into the Wild. And now that we've created some text, you can also see that a new track has been created in the timeline. This object on the timeline is an Essential Graphics layer. And if you want to edit this, then you need the Essential Graphics panel. In my layout you can find it here, but if you don't have this panel enabled, you can do this inside the window menu and then select Essential Graphics. With this Essential Graphics panel, you can change some options to the text. First I will select the text and then I will increase the size. You can do that with this slider. If you increase the size of the text too much, it will fall outside the text box. You can fix this by either lowering the text size or increase the size of the text box. And as you can see, you can do that with the selection tool, and you can also use it to reposition the text. Now let's be a bit more creative with the title. I'm going to select the middle word of the title and I'm going to resize the text. Then I'm going to change the weight of the font, and I will also reposition the text. And now I will add another layer of text. Again, I'm using the Type tool to create a new text box. And inside the Essential Graphics panel, you can see that there's a new text layer created. The red line next to the text box indicates the size of the text, and as you can see, it's too large, so we need to decrease the size. Let's add some more text. In this case, I'm going to add episode 2, because this is actually my second Premiere Basics tutorial. I uploaded the first one a year ago when I started this channel. And now, 70 videos later, I'm happy to make another one. So if you like my tutorials and you would like to know more about Premiere, then please consider to subscribe. Back to the title. We've now created two text layers and we're going to add another shape layer. You can do this by clicking the new icon here in the Essential Graphics panel, and then we'll select Rectangle. Then I'm going to use the selection tool to cover the entire title with the rectangle shape. In the Essential Graphics panel, I'm going to disable the fill and I'm going to enable the stroke. And I'm going to increase the size to 17 and a little bit of repositioning so the title is centered inside this box. Next we're going to do a little bit of basic animation for the title. First make sure you've got the Essential Graphics layer selected on the timeline and then move over to the Effects Control panel. I will first close all the layers so we've got a better overview. Here you can also see the three Essential Graphic layers that we just created. Inside the Effects Control panel, go to the Motion section and then enable keyframes. With a keyframe, you can assign a specific value to an object. And if you create multiple keyframes, you can create a transition between the values. Sounds confusing, but it's very easy. Let me show you how this works. You can enable keyframes by clicking the stopwatch icon. And as you can see here, this has now created a keyframe on the timeline. I'll put it a bit forward in time because this will be the final position. And when I change the horizontal value here, it will create a new keyframe. And now when we do a playback between the two keyframes, you can see the animation. We can make the animation a bit more smoother by right-clicking the keyframe and select Ease In for the last keyframe and Ease Out for the first keyframe. This might sound a bit opposite, but it's the right way to do it. So now when we give it a playback, you'll see that it goes a bit more smoother. The final thing to cover before we do an export is color correction and color grading. The last clip that we imported is our victim for some color correction and color grading. We're going to do this inside the Lumetri color panel. If you don't see it, you can activate it in the window menu and then select Lumetri color. In this case it's already enabled because we've selected the color workspace. In this tutorial I will only cover the basics of the Lumetri color panel. I've also made a dedicated video only for this tool. So if you want to learn more about color correction and color grading, then definitely watch that video. We're going to start with the basic correction section to do some color correction. Let's say we want to reduce the whites to get a bit more details in the clouds, then we can use this slider to correct it. You could also try the highlight slider, that might even give a better result. And now we've got a lot more details in the clouds. So as you've seen, you can use the basic section to correct your footage, for example when it's over or underexposed. And that is what we call color correction. Next we're going to look at a bit of color grading. Inside the creative section of the Lumetri color panel, you can apply color grading presets to your footage. These presets are also known as LUTs, lookup tables. When you click on one of these arrows, you can browse through the available templates. If you found a look that you like and you want to apply it, then double click on the picture. And this will apply the color grading to the footage. Sometimes the color grading templates might be a bit too much and they start to look unnatural. You can fix this by lowering the intensity. And you can look at the before and after by turning this checkbox on and off. So now we have only fixed one of our clips, but let's say we want to apply the same look at all the clips of our project. In that case we need to use an adjustment layer. You can create one in the project panel. Click on the new icon and then select adjustment layer. In this case you can use the same settings from your sequence, 1080p and 25 frames a second. Click OK. Now you've got an adjustment layer object inside the project panel and you can drag this over to the timeline. And then you can spread the adjustment layer out over all the other clips. You could see this adjustment layer as a transparent video where you can apply effects to. So if you select the adjustment layer on the timeline and then apply some color grading to it, this will affect all the other clips underneath the adjustment layer. Obviously this looks awful, but you get the point. This way you can apply the same look to all the clips on your timeline. And as I mentioned before, you can lower the intensity if it's too much. And now we will go to the final step of this basics tutorial, and that is exporting the movie. If our project is finished and we want to export this, then we need to go to File and then click Export and then Media. This will open up the export settings panel. At the bottom here you can select the range of your export. In this case it will be the entire project, 35 seconds. Next you need to select a format or a codec. One of the most common codecs at this moment is H.264 and that's what we're going to use for this export. After export this will result in an MP4 file. The next thing you want to adjust is bitrate. You can do this at the bottom of the video section. If you don't have any specific target platform to play your videos on, then I would suggest to stick to the bitrate of the original footage. In Windows you can do this by right-clicking the file, then click on Properties and go to Details. There you'll find the original bitrate. As you can see here it's somewhere around 40,000, so that's what we're going to use for the export. For the best quality result after exporting, I would suggest to use the VBR 2 pass. And I will also apply Use Maximum Render Quality. And this will be the estimated file size after exporting. This is the place where you can select the directory for your export. In this case we will use the same directory as our project. And if you want, you can also change the file name of your export. And these are all the settings that we're going to apply for this export. So now when I hit export, Premiere will start producing the MP4 file. All depending on the size of your project, this may take a while. And that also concludes my basics tutorial on Premiere Pro CC 2018. All the links to the downloads and suggested videos can be found in the video description. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, then please give this video a thumbs up, that would really help me a lot. For now, I will say thank you for watching and see you next time on Orange 83.